Is America headed for a civil war? Some new data shows that that is possible, particularly data around the sentiment between various populations and disagreement amongst, I don't know, I can name a bunch of things. The 2020 election, the January 6th riots, abortion at this Supreme Court again. What are you trying to say, David?
Well, I just want to ask you a question. So are they saying like a civil war that's going to be more like weaponized, using actual weapons? Because I feel like we've been in an ideological civil war for decades, a decade at least.
Well, I mean, specifically what Charles Blow is writing about here in this New York Times piece, that we're edging closer to a civil war, is basically saying that, the civil wars are, well, especially the United States Civil War, started around, of course, the disagreement over slavery. You can talk about it being states' rights issue, but it was at the core of it was slavery, right? And so what kind of an issue could divide us in much the same way as slavery? And he makes the argument that it's abortion. And that once in 2022, when Roe v. Wade is overturned, and by all accounts that's going to happen, the Supreme Court clearly is leaning that direction, it seems, from those oral arguments. And even liberals are saying, we lost this one. Like, this one's done. And then immediately, once that happens, you have states that immediately bounce into action and pass laws outlawing it in their states. Then you already have this massive ideological rift, as David's talking about, across the country. But really, his issue specifically is around abortion. And, we've been talking about this book, we've been reading, this War on Small Business, but one of the details that Carol Roth lays out in that book is about how many of the northern states subsidize some of the southern states.
Yes, very much so.
Right. So like New York, I mean, the amount of money that a citizen pays into taxes in New York, they don't get it back.
So
in the form of grants and other
the way
things.
that she explains it is that citizens pay a certain threshold of tax, and obviously certain high tax states are paying more. That tax is sent up to the federal government, but the federal government only spends so much per person when it allocates that money back to the states. And right now, the way we're looking at many social programs, from landlord assistance to rental assistance to anything that's been within the last 2 years in any social stimulus bill, it's funneled back through the states, but it does not get funneled evenly. It's not split apart by 50. That wouldn't make sense because populations are different in different states, but it's also not split by population. So like if we all went to dinner, right, and we said, let's split the bill evenly, that makes sense. That's not how it happens. The way it goes now is certain states get back, let's say 10,000 per person. Some states get back just a couple hundred per person, but the average person is paying more than that, right? So the average person is paying upwards of $12,000, $13,000 in taxes in, say, New York, New Jersey, but the state only gets back 9,000 or 10,000, right? Whereas other states may have a lower average income tax payment, but get back more. It doesn't really make sense. It would make sense if, say, you know how you pay for things for your children, like how many children there are mine. I brought 3 children, so I'll pay this per head. It doesn't work that way. It just doesn't.
But I think the abortion part of this is really fascinating, and because if you think about the Civil War being across a border,
Yes.
like Mason-Dixon line, right? This wouldn't be that way. It wouldn't just be the South versus the North. It would
Yes.
be, it would be California. I mean, there's liberals that have been calling for California to secede from the Union, make its own country, secede. And there'd be a lot of right wingers that would love that.
Yes.
Get California out of here.
Yes.
Get this crazy California out of here. I think it's a really compelling argument. Ray Dalio has written about it in his new book, and it's a really fascinating take on what he sees happening on the idea of a civil war. Listen.
Write something alarming in the book. You see a 30% chance that there could be what you call a civil war here sometime in the next decade. Is that a metaphor? Are you talking about actual conflict? What do you mean by civil war, and how might that play out?
What I mean by civil war is the not following the rules, the Constitution, the rules, agreeing by those rules, and having a power conflict that can take its various forms. What history taught me is that when the causes that people are behind are more important to them than the system is in jeopardy. And so as we go into the 2022 elections, for example, I think you're going to see the move to greater polarity in the primaries and so on, and you're going to see that intensification happen. And I think it's not surprising now that people are questioning whether rules of who is elected and whether the rules will govern. And I think that there's a good chance, and we're seeing it now, of the movements of people to different states in which, certain types of people will go, the rich probably will go to states where they're more comfortable and so on. And that creates questions of how even the federal government will deal with the states. I do believe there's a risk, a significant risk, that the rule book of how to agree will not be the means by which that's decided, such as, for example, sanctuary cities or something. You send a rule down, and they say, and a state or a city might say no, and then it will be power that will determine how that goes down. So it's that kind of civil war that I'm worried about. I'm worried about working well together to be productive. I'm worried about the extremism rather than the moderation of a one country working in a healthy way.
Okay, but we have in history seen power systems break up in this way. For instance, the USSR, and that ended up being a good thing for some states that became independent.
I mean, could you imagine, a country where we have 50 countries instead of 50 states?
I mean, it would look like Europe.
Right.
And
who
why
that?
is that terrible?
Who is that guy? He looks like Mr. Roper, but who is that guy?
Ray Dalio, he's a famous investor, multi-billionaire famous investor. He wrote a New York Times best-selling book called Principles a number of years ago that was a huge bestseller. He's been very, very accurate on economic crises in the United States over the years. He's a very successful investor, but he also, he's an investor in China. We were railing against him a few weeks ago here about his position on what was happening in China.
Right.
And
that's right.
But people pay attention to him when he talks about these social fabrics. I mean, people pay attention to Ray Dalio, and I do. I think he's a very brilliant guy. So it's worth discussing that. But yeah, let's go back to that question. I mean, think about that. Would it be so bad if we had 50 countries instead of 50 states?
My knee-jerk reaction is no. I don't care that much about being part of the same system as people who live a 6-hour flight away from.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't feel like that would. I'd have to think about it more. This is my knee-jerk reaction.
Well, I mean, think about the state of Texas, right? Texas has wanted to do this for forever, right? Texas would be thrilled with it, right? They're building. They've lowered. No state income tax. They've incentivized business growth. All of these businesses are moving there. Hey, keep your hands off my government. Keep your hands off my land.
Yes.
Don't mess with Texas.
Well, and like you said, to be a lot like Europe, because you would have different states that had different benefits that you'd be like, ooh, like Denmark. Ooh, they have healthcare in Florida. I think I'm gonna move to Florida to get healthcare and better taxes for my business.
And then actually the states can compete on their own ideological standards, but also on business standards too. Texas is saying, hey, guys, we're crypto friendly. We are tax friendly. We don't have state tax. And so people move into Texas for these specific reasons. It's who's open for business and who's not.
Right. Like when you look at the
same thing is happening all over the world. Go ahead.
Yeah, when you look at like the Balkans, for instance, right? Like, so you have favorable countries for business in the Balkans, like Montenegro, that thought, hey, how do we compete on the world stage? Well, we will make it really, banker friendly. You can open a bank account. You can business friendly, zero, business taxes, etc. I don't think it's zero, but close. All sorts of incentives for businesses and people to move to Montenegro to do business. But then neighboring Serbia, not so favorable. Mm-hmm. So you have, and they were part of the same block. So you choices, right? So you might say, hey, I want to move to Tennessee, and I'm an automaker. I'm going to move there because of low taxes. Maybe the labor is better. And you have all these different disparate ideas. And then New York won't have to subsidize Tennessee. I think it's a compelling argument.
It's this like, we have this pain point because we somehow believe that we need the federal government in order to protect us from what? Or, would the United States then be more vulnerable to attack if we were just a conglomerate of different member states like the European Union? Well, there would be less threat in the world. We would have less we would have less ability to bully other countries, which then would make other countries want to attack us less, right? Because our global power, that's something we absolutely don't want to do.
You'd have states that would be putting up borders and everything, like we don't want other people in here.
Yes.
Walls.
Yeah.
But I think this New York Times piece specifically that Charles Blow writes, and it's a well-written piece, and he says he's comparing it to what we saw with the Civil War in the 1800s in 1861 when the war broke out with President Lincoln at the helm at the time. He sees similarities and then dissimilarities here, because what he's saying specifically is that in some cases, the abortion battle now being waged in the court is a test case. Can the states make an argument that a civil right can be reversed on the state level? Can they make the case that all that the Constitution has not explicitly spelled out should be reserved for the states? The Constitution has been silent on quite a bit since it was written in 1787, and the last time it was amended was nearly 30 years ago. So what he's saying is really the only way we could get to solving this abortion issue would be with an amendment to the Constitution, an actual constitutional amendment allowing this to happen. And there's just no way that's going to happen. When are you going to get 2/3 majority for that to happen? And he says all of us should be very worried about what we see happening with these abortion cases, not just women who might need abortions or relatives and friends of women who might need them. We should worry about whether or not we are at an inflection point for an age of regression.
Or we can think about what an actual revolution looks like, right? It is possible in the modern world. If you look at Portugal, their revolution of flowers was not bloody. It was one government system overthrown with, yes, people died, but it was
very minimal,
relatively few compared to other overturnings of government in history. This quote from The War on Small Business, the book we've been mentioning, by an Idaho representative, Brett Rayburn, really has me thinking. He says people are too willing to overlook all of the bad in the system so they don't have to forego the small benefits they receive. And I feel like that was a punch in the gut to me, because we think that we need the federal government for these specific reasons. And so we allow all kinds of bad behavior, all kinds of mismanagement of our own money, all kinds of, it just, the story this morning in the newsletter, how President Biden yesterday signed an executive order to enhance customer service for Americans, meaning if you call Social Security or Medicare or the IRS, most of the time you get nobody. There is no customer service. They don't treat us like a customer. They treat us like a slave. And now he's saying you can actually sign up for a callback sometime. I mean, it may be 2 weeks when you get that callback in the middle of the night, but they're going to at least give you an option, because right now, if you call, for instance, we had a tax issue, a refund that I was calling on, and it was for a different year that you couldn't look up anymore in their system. And I was calling and calling and said, nobody can take your call right now. Bye. Click. And I was like, well, then what?
America.
What is it?
And by the way, didn't they hire 4,000 additional people during the pandemic to handle phone calls? I mean, they can't answer the phone. But Apple can do this. Like if you call Apple customer service and they'll do you want to schedule a call back? And they'll call you back we'll call you back in 20 minutes. And sure enough, the phone rings 20 minutes later,
Who? Apple?
Apple.
I never choose that option. That bothers me so much when they're like, we'll call you back. I'm like, no, girl, I'll hold.
They're like, you can either wait 20 minutes or we'll call you back in 20 minutes.
I always choose to wait because I don't trust anybody.
Yeah, I'll literally go down to her office and I hear hold music for hours. I'm like, who are you on a hold with? She's like the IRS or somebody, who knows, David, go ahead, sir.
I got a question. So don't you feel though in Portugal and Iceland, the people are a lot more united. They're not ideologically polar opposites like we are here in the United States. I feel like any kind of revolution would be impossible without a civil war first here to weed out the people that are You know what I mean? Like we're just so divided.
What do you mean weed them out? Like we have to kill them first?
No. I mean,
Yeah,
you're gonna
he
you
means
have to
kill.
deal with the you have to deal with the ideological thing first. Like we have to get over that, and everybody come to the middle before we could work on the main government.
But
isn't
it
that-
helps the government that there are so many fissures over different issues. Just for instance, yesterday in the newsletter, we had a story about how, the president held this big democracy summit and saying like, we're great at democracy. Everybody else should do it too. And it was like just a speech that rang hollow because no one really cared. And it was a virtual conference, but there was no one like, yes, the United States, very good. We're going to emulate you. Right. And so we're, as Philip pointed out last week, we are mansplaining democracy to the rest of the world.
Right.
And we're not doing it so great ourselves. And there are some who are, for instance, this Steve Bannon project to get more people to become election counters for 2024. And now election boards in Republican states say that they have an overwhelming amount of people who now want to sign up to count the votes, not to help take votes. They want to be vote counters because they did not trust the way that votes were counted before. So there's that, like all elections are stolen and some people are going to die on that hill. There's abortion. Some people will die on that hill. There's this gun control, right? It's just,
Well, that's what
there's so many people in too many small different groups that if there were one issue like abortion, I don't really think that this will be the dividing issue, but
Well, and that's
it's
the thing.
possible.
Like in this country, we vote by singular issue, and we vote party. Like there's no, a lot of people, they plant their flag and they don't want to move on their one issue at all. Like if one person doesn't support their main issue, like they could be 90% what they would want in a candidate, but if they don't support that one issue, they're not going to vote for them. So it's like we have to start being more, like less focused on individual things and look at the whole, because that's the thing. Like unless we all look at the whole, which is the federal government. That's like when I went to Occupy Wall Street. I went to Occupy Washington because I was like, the Occupy Wall Street people, they're in the wrong place. You're not at the root of the problem. The root is the government. The Wall Street is the way it is because of the government. So that fight needs to happen in Washington, not in New York.
right. This idea that there's this like take down capitalism, like capitalism is a natural force in many different, like even indigenous societies, right? Like,
Oh, yeah. I've always
who
bring that up,
gathers
like
the
the
most
Indians.
rabbit or whatever, or this is the one that, I'm sorry, that was an ignorant statement. The one that people come to the most, right? Who has the most rabbit fur or whatever. It's not about capitalism, and it's just like a fun, sexy thing that people say on their Instagram, like we must destroy capitalism. No, it's actually central planning that's perverting the natural forces of capitalism.
In this piece, I just want to kind of go back to, because the fact that the New York Times is discussing civil war is it's a pretty strong statement. But I think he makes the point, because David asked earlier, or when you see gun violence, is this going to be like war where young men going? And he makes the point in this article, it's not going to be like the Civil War of the 1800s. It's going to be instead obvious differences. He says the Civil War I see is not the kind that would leave hundreds of thousands of young men dead in combat. This is not to say that we aren't seeing spates of violence, but rather that this new war is going to be fought in the courts. It'll be fought in the state houses and, as you were just talking about, the ballot boxes, rather than in the fields. And this war won't only be about the subjugation of black people, but also about the subjugation of all who challenge the white racist patriarchy.
Well, if we actually had investigative journalists in the media, they actually could be the revolution. The revolution could happen in the media if they shone a light so that people that were singular issue focused saw what really happens, that these people do not work for them. Like if the media would draw attention to that could be the revolution, but that never happened. But I think for us, it would be easier to infiltrate the media than the government.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'd love to hear our thoughts from our viewers in the comments about this. Do you think we're in a civil war right now? Do you think we're going to see a full-blown civil war in the future? And do you agree with Ray Dalio? Let me know in the comments.